From D-Day, Those Who Were There, by Juliet Gardiner. By the end of May these immense naval forces were assembling in the ports of southern England. It was an awesome sight. No one could believe that the invasion fleet would ever put to sea intact, marveled an American staff officer as he surveyed the tiny harbors along the south coast and the big sprawling harbor of Southampton packed like miniature Pearl harbors, with ships stacked gunwale to gunwale. Apart from the armada around Britain's coastline, evidence of the coming invasion littered the south of England. At the end of May the roads of Britain were clogged with convoys of army vehicles, tanks, trucks and jeeps as they streamed south towards the marshalling areas along the coast. Buildings had to be knocked down, roads widened or newly built, bridges strengthened, and hard-standing and laybys constructed to accommodate the huge amphibious trucks and giant transporters that poured into British ports, laden with tanks and bulldozers. In addition, some unexpected demolition occurred when transporters got stuck under road bridges, knocked down parapets and took the corners off innumerable buildings. A teacher in Dorset was alarmed at the sight of a truck carrying 2 Sherman tanks. It must have required tremendous skill, and a heavy engine, to drive this heavy load through our narrow streets. Our narrow country roads were unsuitable for Sherman tanks. She found the noise of the tanks pulling up the steep hill deafening. It was impossible to speak. I arranged with the pupils that I would dictate until these tanks drew near, and then they should study their notes while we endured the deafening sound outside. She recalls that employers gave staff an extra quarter of an hour for lunch because the town had become so congested with the convoys blocking the narrow streets that it took twice as long to get around. Robert Arbid met his engineers as he drove up the A1. Everywhere along that road, and all the others in England, there were endless convoys of army vehicles, miles and miles of them, moving along bumper to bumper, division after division. The 820th Engineers had pulled out of their aerodrome in Suffolk and were headed south to take part in the invasion. As bulldozers rumbled past, and the motor graders and the shovels and the trucks, I stood up in the front of the jeep and shouted and waved, "So long Pete, good luck Tommy, take it easy now John. Good luck, good luck." Joseph Martin was a sick bay attendant on a naval landing craft that was to bombard the beaches in advance of the forces landing. We spearheaded the invasion. We were to go in even before the minesweepers. He remembers, we were in Southampton water and I remember the skipper calling everyone together and saying, "Right, from such and such an hour the ship is sealed off." That meant nobody could go ashore or nobody could come aboard. And then he said, "There's one post going out now and there'll be one collection of mail." Words to the effect that you'd better write your last letters. It wasn't quite as dramatic as that, but that's in fact what it meant. I wrote to my mother and father, and of course, my wife, Lisa, and I remember the difficulty that I had in writing those letters because you couldn't write home, "Well, I'm going into battle. I'm going into the unknown. Might not come back." You couldn't say any of those things. All you could say was, "Well, we're off on an adventure, and I'm sure we'll be back, and when I get back we'll look forward to doing this and that. And you know what a wonderful mother and father you've been," and that sort of thing without making it too sloppy or sentimental. At the same time you could imagine them receiving the letter and reading it, so I didn't want them to say, "My God, you know this is the last letter we're going to receive from our boy," so they were very difficult letters to write, there's no doubt about that. However, they were written and sent and that was that. By the 4th of June, a Sunday, everything was in place. The operational orders for the Channel crossing, Operation Neptune, issued on the 24th of April ran to nearly 1,000 closely typed pages, a doorstep of paper 3 inches thick which detailed every boat's position, tasks and objectives. The U.S. Western Task Force, consisting of Force O and Force U, was ready to leave from a coastal strip which stretched from Salcombe in Devon to Poole in Dorset, while Forces G, J and S of the Eastern Task Force were strung out along the Solent and Southampton water. The tanks, weapons and equipment, waterproofed and camouflaged, were stored aboard the troopships and landing craft, some covered with netting, which lay in wait all along the south coast in harbours, in inlets and on mud flats. The London railway station stood empty except for a number of unfortunate would-be travellers, stranded when the trains had all been cancelled. Airfields all over the south and west flew the flag that informed planes, "Airfield unserviceable, landing forbidden," above rows of waiting planes. The men were already aboard the ships and landing craft. Cawthon and his battalion clambered in 2 tugs to be ferried out to their transport, the SS Thomas Jefferson, where they found that the accommodations were spacious for a troopship, and the GI noticed for the first time that the oppressive crowding, so much part of army life, thins out markedly the closer the approach to battle.